It's the witness voice. I'll just stop now.
Robert.
Sorry, that was really obnoxious and rude. Okay, so we're going to get started here. We've got time, but so hello, welcome back to Queens, welcome to Queens, welcome to all the freshers, to the Literafic, and my name is Marley Spinett, and I'm the president of the 167th session of the Society, and I'd like to welcome you to our first debate, first ordinary meeting of the year, which is this house believes the West created ISIS. What's going on here? Okay, so Candy Corner was in that corner. Candy Corner has sort of been like subsumed by these people. So Candy Corner's behind there, so if you can sort of meander your way through and get some candy, go for it, we have those. There's also a suggestions box, again, in there somewhere. So suggestions, if you have anything afterwards, if there's anything good, anything bad, anything you liked, anything you didn't like. I was actually meant to go and read out some suggestions, but I'll go and do that. 2 seconds. Meander my way through. It's a bit like this.
We value your input very much.
Thank you. Okay, well we'll read some out. Because last week he's asked for Kinder Hippos, which was the only valuable suggestion we had. From the Dark Lord Store, I think. Okay, so we have a pledge of allegiance to
Queen.
C-A-H-U-L-E.
Cthulhu.
Long may you terrorize. So I have no idea what that means, but apparently pledge of allegiance.
Don't. Please.
Anyone explain? Well? Okay. What did you say?
It's not Welsh. Should you have looked at these before you picked them out?
Those are honorary life membership cards. We are actually getting honorary life membership cards. That's been in process for about 6 months. They won't be golden. They will be like frosted plastic, as far as I know. But yeah, we can tell they're golden. We should all get capes like you. It's not a cape, it's a coin. Please open a window is a very, very valid suggestion. I'm not sure with a Pro-Vice Chancellor here that he would suggest opening any more windows because we can't without breaking them. But thanks for that one. And this is supposed to be the last one. Finbar is Bay. Finbar is this guy, and he is Bay. Suggestion boxes can go up those in at the end of the debate. Okay. So we have. Where is next? I was going to tell you a bit about the history of the Literafic. For those of you who were here last week, I did say a wee sort of brief bit about it. I won't talk too long, but I'll start in 1850. Okay, so the Literafic started in 1850 by a group of 6 scholars, and our president at the time was Edward Lawrence Godkin. We have Godkin Prize for Maiden Speakers in December, which is named after him. So Literafic was started as a paper reading society, and there was no debate really going on. So in 1868, a few members, well 27 members, decided that they were going to start a new society. So they petitioned the Vice Chancellor of the University, and they started the Historical and Critical Society. So this lasted for about 5 years, and then they came back to us because, just saying. And that's when the society began sort of debating instead of paper reading, and the meetings were like, the reference meetings have thousands of people at the public meetings and hundreds at the ordinary meetings, so it really, really was massive. They used to be held in the Whittle Hall, which had a wee bit more ventilation and air in here. So they were really, really massive, and they had people from all across Northern Ireland and people from Belfast coming to their meetings. Our affiliation with Lord Dufferin as well is the next thing. So we started our affiliation with Lord Dufferin in 1863, when he was made a speech to the society addressing his work as being UK Commissioner in Syria. So he was sent to inquire into the massacre of Christians. So he's read a speech at the society. So apparently during this meeting there were more tickets sold than there were seats. Right? So people sort of got a wee bit antsy outside who didn't get in and they paid their ticket, and they started rioting. Okay, so thankfully they're all inside. So they started rioting, and somehow something happened, and the windows got broken and the door got broken. Okay, so Belfast town mayor blamed the Literific. The Literific blamed the townspeople, and somehow the Literific had to pay for the door of the Whittle Hall, which is great. In 1902, Lord Dufferin granted us a silver Dufferin medal, which has not been seen since 1902. It was sterling silver, if anyone's keeping an eye out. A replica was made in like the 50s, again hasn't been seen since the 50s. We are in process of getting the Dufferin medal, but we probably will keep it under lock and key, seeing as they seem to go missing. And there's so many letters in our archives in the McCloy Library pleading with people to try and find this Dufferin medal, and every single letter says, no, we haven't seen it since 1902 or the 50s. So after this here, the society sort of ran pretty smoothly up until about 1967. At this time, sort of, I said this last meeting, but you sort of have to consider the political climate within Northern Ireland and globally at the time. So the 60s, things were going on, Cold War was happening, troubles were starting up. And people didn't really want to leave their houses in Belfast at this time of night. So they're coming home from the Literific at 10, half 10, whatever. They didn't want to walk around the streets of Belfast. And the university sort of thought they were getting a wee bit too political, too politically minded for an apolitical society. So they had motions. I have a wee list of the motions here. So this house would in turn King Billy. This house believes freedom of the press is made slaves of the public. This year as well, we're doing that again. This house believes internment is justifiable. I remember the time period that this is all happening in, okay? This house believes the Northern Ireland government can't be blamed for the division in the community. This house believes that world communism is the only hope of world unity. This house believes that censorship has its uses. This house believes trade unions are using their power in the best interest of the community. God save the Queen. This house believes trade unions are running the economy. This house would raise the scarlet. Damn you, Ireland. Again, think of the time period. This house believes the American presence in Vietnam will not lead to peace. This house believes that communism is the enemy to the open society, and this house has no confidence in trade unions. So I think you can sort of see a wee bit of a theme of we were getting too political, right? And I sort of made this joke last week in that we're getting too political, the Queen thought we're getting too political, and then our lovely president of the society decided during one meeting that he was going to get a bit too naked and started stripping during a debate. And then he went over across the road to the Students' Union, and then he stole a wee bit too much drink, and we got banned. So some would say it was unjust. So we got banned for 40 odd years, sort of subsumed within the Union Debating Society, and in 2011 out came the Literific. We sort of reformed, and we got our first year's SU grant, which means we didn't actually, those 40 years don't count. So we're back 2011, and we started 2011. We started with 5 members, and now, as you can see, there's so many members in this room, and it's class. That's where we are now. Hopefully that wasn't too long and boring. It was like a couple of minutes. Okay, so on from that, 2011, right? We're 2015. So I would like to introduce you to my lovely council of this year. So these are the people who's going to be asking for help this year and asking for advice on what to do, and they're going to tell me what to do and whatever else. So first of all, my name is Marion Sinnott, as I said. I am a master's student in aerospace engineering, and that's about all. If you want to know anything sort of generally about the society, get in touch with me, president@literific.org, or Facebook or whatever. So you can text me if you want. Up next is our secretary, Mr. Robbie Whitehurst, and he will explain a bit about himself and his role. Which you did not know
Whoa,
until...
put on the spot here. Basically, every week I write and I read out the minutes from the last session, and if you have any queries about signing up, you can come along and join me.
I don't need to stand on.
If you have any queries about signing up, if you have any queries about signing up or want to know anything about the site, you can come along to me. I'm available on all platforms.
That didn't deserve an applause.
I don't know why he stuck that to me. Also, Robbie, he's doing the sign-ups for today, so just get in touch with him. If you haven't got a wee shiny membership card that you should all be holding up to vote later on, nobody has theirs like it. Okay. Next up is our treasurer, Dr. Craig Now. He is a doctor.
Dentist. I saw the money out.
And next up is our internal convener, Mr. Owen Mulholland.
Hello, so as Marley said, I'm Will Mulholland. I'm a PhD student here at Queen's. Weird, right? So come to me if you want to speak at debates. I sort of organise sort of the overall manager of all the debates. Things like the formal, the Christmas dinner, the Stormont debate, which while I have your attention, we're still looking for speakers. So the motion is this House believes our Equality Act is an oxymoron. So if you want to speak at that, either proposition or opposition, email myself at internal@litterific or Gemma here, who's our second year rep. As well as that, has everyone here heard of Degree Plus?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So for those who don't know, this is something you can apply to in your year of graduation from Queen's, which is a certificate to show that you've done extracurricular activity during your time at Queen's, and it really ups your employability on graduation. Over the summer, I applied on behalf of Litterific for Degree Plus status and confirmed yesterday, day before, we are officially on the Degree Plus list for Route B. So to qualify for this, you need to be a member, sign up. You need 50% attendance throughout the entire year and to have attended one workshop during that time. And then Marie-Louise will write a letter of recommendation to clarify all of that. It will be signed by 2 council members, and then you can hand that in your application. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so 50% of debates, it sounds like a lot, but it's only 6 of them this term, 6 the next term. The workshops run once a month, so it's really not a big deal. If you're going to be an active member of the society, you might as well sort of get a certificate from it and use it, to help you along with your career. And you do get a certificate with your degree that you're probably not thinking about, but you can apply for any year So next up, with some announcements as well, is our external convener, Mr. Benjamin Murphy.
Hi guys, I'm Dan, obviously, as you heard. I am a second year law student. I am in charge of pretty much all the external competitions, hence the title external convener. I am in charge of the Irish Times competition, which we hope to send lots of people to this year. I'm in charge of our IB, the first IB that we'll be holding in about 40 years, all going well, so no pressure on me there at all. The next IB is, as I said announcement-wise, UCD, which is on the 9th of October. We're hoping to send 2 teams down of absolute novices, so if anyone's interested in being involved in the novice competition, going down to UCD and networking with other students, probably in a bar with very loud music and alcohol. But by all means, add me on Facebook, FaceTube, Twitter. I don't know how to tweet, but add me on Twitter if you want.
And next up was our outreach officer, Lily Vedder, who I don't think is here tonight, but I don't explain her role, because I was last year. She is in charge of the schools competitions and general advertising in the society. So we're going to host 3 schools competitions this year, and if you want to get involved, be a judge. If your old school wants to compete, please give us the contact email of whoever was in charge of debating, or English, or history, or whoever was involved in it. at your school, and they will be held. Debating Matters, I think, is the 21st of this month. Phil Speaks is the 7th of November, and our own Literary Alpha newspaper group schools competition is next February. So, clap for Lily. And our open rep is Mr. James McNally.
Hey, I'm James. You'll see me directing you into a room earlier on. I'm the open rep, and that means I have basically no role, but I am meant to be the voice of the ordinary member, and I don't know what that means. So please everyone get in touch and want me to have a job. If you have any problems, anything at all, like you want to talk about society and any issues, please do come to me. It's what I'm meant to be doing. So yeah, thank you very much.
Yes, please find some work for James.
Just £2 a month.
And our second year rep is Ms. Gemma Cannon.
Hello, everybody. I have effectively the same role as James, i.e. I do everything that everybody else doesn't want to do. So if there's anything I can help you with at all, especially second years, because that's who I'm here to represent, just come to me, email me at reps@literific.org. I really, really enjoy getting emails, so if you do that would be great. So yeah, any questions, come to me or talk to me on Facebook.
And our final position, who is possibly in this room, is our first year rep. And obviously we couldn't elect a first year rep last year. So if you would like to nominate yourself, I was going to say and other people, but I'm afraid of what I'm going to get in the inbox if I tell you to nominate someone else. So yeah, if you'd like to put yourself forward for first year rep, they'll be decided upon in 2 weeks' time, I think. If you could email secretary@literific.org. You can talk to us before, talk to James and Gemma about their role as reps. Give them something to do, just to see more about your role, or talk to any member of council just to see what you'll be doing for the year. And finally, you will get rid of me for a while, and I would like to welcome our secretary, Mr. Robbie Whitehurst, to, I believe, wrap last week's minutes of this House for Legal tomorrow morning.
I'll get to that. First of all, I'd just like to say it's really quite stunning to see so many people around here. I've never had someone behind me before.
Sorry.
Bit of respect, please. Now, I may have been introduced on the promise, for those of you that weren't here last year. In a shameless attempt to sell my body, I offered to format the first minutes of this year, which was This House Will Legalise Marijuana, in a rap form. I have never heard a rap song about marijuana, so I have nowhere to begin. So I'm putting my foot down, guys. I'm not doing it. I'm just doing it normally. I'm sorry. I'm sorry if that disappoints anyone in this room, but that's just how it is. Naturally, some people like to assume that rhyming is quite easy. It makes me feel actually quite good. But now that I think about it, such fears would be preposterous. A musical medley could be rather prosperous. Should you cast your mind's eye into the past, 'twas Thursday the 24th when the Literific met last. 15 attendees said please from far-flung as Tijuana to observe if this house would legalise marijuana. Questions were heard from Totson and Finlay before our time was stretched quite thinly, and so we resumed to keep things on par, because the sooner the end, the sooner the bar. Mr. Finbar Rogers opened for the prop, convincing us all to embrace the wonder of pot. Clutching a flask all the while he lamented the war on drugs that Nixon invented. $1 trillion tossed down the drain, asserting that weed plays tricks on the brain. Mr. Rogers claimed that it does no more harm than David Cameron let loose on a farm. First in opposition was Harry Adair with fire in his lungs and the wind in his hair. He stated his argument was fairly plain, that the legality of Mary Jane must remain to avoid pain, shame, feeling insane, and altogether messed up in the membrane. Decriminalisation was the word of the day, as legalisation is not the only way. The speaker said the idea should be sent to the rocks, lest we wish to open Pandora's box. Second in front is the valiant Craig Miller, eager to show us that Kush is not killer. And as sure as there's a Croatian city by the name of Zupanja, he was here to tell us about his love of ganja. I'm so sorry. He lamented how a country with such colossal power commits some of its budget. Answer that, please. He lamented how a country with such colossal power commits some of its budget to combating a flower. He demanded legality to remove junk from the skunk. In conclusion, he was blunt. It's time to wake up, smell the grass, make a joint effort in the need for weed. Jack Thompson then rose for the opposition in a bid to alter the House's position. He said the reason that laws are so restrictive is because the drug itself is so damn addictive. He lambasted the proposition's facts, saying they had it all wrong about tax. The black markets wouldn't leave if we legalised weed. They would lower the prices to suit their need. Concluding for the prop was Barry Brown, leader of Sister NI. He wore his heart on his sleeve and made his case for why we should all get high. 20 years I've smoked weed, claimed Mr. Brown from Strand to Botanic and on into town. Pot is antipsychotic, he said, it helps many people stay right in the head. Its spectrum is broad and helps many things, just one advantage which legalising brings. To conclude, Miss Emma Chadwick, toga in tow, telling us all to step away from the blow. Saying that's no reason why the law should be dropped, legality simply wouldn't stop the abuse. The marketers, dealers, the dangerous misuse. What we need are more tests and research done before the fight against drug abuse can truly be won. Legalising wouldn't mean just picking up prescriptions, it would mean pain, depravity and fueling your addictions. To the vote we went, and to the personal opinion of the floor, which read ayes 26, nays 18, abstentions 4. And so then to the finale, which turned out to be ayes 19, nays 24 and abstentions 3. And with that, I have one thing to ask before I say goodbye. Can I take the minutes as read?
So good. So who wants to have rap minutes every week? I think the eyes have it. So first of all, I'm going to apologise for my phone going off. There is a reason for that. My phone's normally on silent, but we don't have a bell today, and I was going to use a ringtone, so my phone was on extra loud. So apologies. Okay, so next we have private members' business. So this is a time where there's been none submitted, which you can do 24 hours in advance of the debate next week, but not now, we can bring some now, of any sort of topics in the news you want to talk about, any sort of mini debates you want to have. Is there anything that has come up that you particularly have a strong feeling about and you want somebody to respond to, or anything you want to ask about society, or we'll just move on if anybody doesn't have anything. Yes? No? Go ahead.
Madam President, what did you have for breakfast?
Okay, we'll move on to President's questions. What did I have for breakfast? Probably sweets at the Freshers Fair, to be honest. I've been up since like 6 and at the Freshers Fair since like 9, so I think it was sweets at the Freshers Fair. After that it was soup just before I came here, so if I faint in this room as well. So thank you. No private business. Okay. Any other questions? Anybody? You can ask any member of council as well. Not you all know who they are. No? Grand. Okay. So now we will move on to tonight's debate. And first of all, you may be wondering who the lovely man in the centre throne is. This is Tony Gallagher. He is the Pro-Vice Chancellor of Queen's for Planning and Public Engagement, and also trustee of the Derfig, who really does a lot to the society. So he'll be chairing the debate for us tonight. So the debate is, this House believes the West created ISIS. I'll go over some words very quickly. There's 7 minute speeches. We'll have 8 speakers today. The first and last minute of each speech is protected. I'm probably going to have to bang on the table since my newfangled technology of a bell on the phone didn't work by some spam number ringing me. So 7-minute speeches, first and last minute, you can't ask any questions, but in the middle 5 minutes you can put your hand up and say, on that point sir, on that point ma'am. And it's up to the speaker whether they accept or reject your point. So if they just sort of wave you down, just sit down gracefully and you can ask a wee while. If you ask a question, please do leave it a wee bit of time just to sort of jump up again and ask another question on the same question. Otherwise you'll hear roars of no barking from probably every other member in the room. If somebody asks a question and another person can't immediately follow it with another question, again you'll get shouts of no barking and please sit down. Please do stand up whenever you ask a point of information or you're speaking or responding to a point, and speak loudly and clearly and be polite, and afterwards we will have questions and answers of which anybody in the floor can ask any questions afterwards, and we will do both sides and points on the motion. So if you want to craft a point during the debate of what you think, you'll have to do that at the end. Have I missed anything out? No? Grand. Okay, so we will get started with this House believes the West clears ISIS with our first speaker for the proposition, Ms. Jessica Simmons.
Okay. There are three extremely important elements that have contributed to the rise of ISIS and illustrate the West's responsibility in this process. They are the creation of a vacuum of identity, the opportunity to seize power and political instability, all of which have been found in an environment created by the West through our colonial legacy and subsequent interventions. So who are the West? The West are state actors, primarily Britain, France and the US, and indeed collective organisations such as NATO, who represent the interests of these states globally. And who are ISIS? This is something that the media have manipulated to scare us into understanding and misunderstanding anything east of our European borders. ISIS are a collection of both rebels who attempted to overthrow Assad during the Arab Spring and other smaller groups who joined forces. They're primarily advocate for an extreme interpretation of Sunni Islam that has been manipulated to suit their ability to gain power and control in order to replicate something similar to the Ottoman Caliphate. So where does the West fit into this? Focusing initially on the West's involvement in imposing a vacuum of identity in the region, this dates far back to the colonial era, where France and Britain dominated. Not only did they dominate territorially, but in terms of culture, language and politics. This manipulation of identity did not end with decolonisation and the dismantling of the Ottoman jurisdiction as one would assume, as it was up to the politicians in Whitehall with a ruler on a map to decide what land became what state, and know that as the Sykes-Picot Agreement. This left the region with nations that in many cases split communities and smaller collective identities right down the middle. Your family could be living in Egypt while you're living over the road in Libya, with no legitimately recognised state decided by the people and dictators that are imposed to favour the former colonial masters. What was supposed to unite the Sunnis, Shias, Christians and Jews when they were unable to unite under a common state. This was the first step towards creating a vacuum of identity that extremism has been able to flourish within today and is entirely the legacy and responsibility of the West.
On that point, ma'am?
Yeah.
Is there an argument that the inability of various communities to live with one another is their fault and not the fault of the person who happened to leave them together?
Well, the political structures that were put in place, the West actually chose certain royal families who created kingdoms themselves, and these sort of suited one community rather than the other, so there hasn't been that ability to change throughout the years. The strategies that these former colonial powers are using today in an attempt to tackle ISIS are outdated methods for dealing with outdated structures. The fictitious jurisdictions drawn by the West fail to...
Do you support ethno nationalism?
I support a combination of ethno and civic nationalism. I don't really think that there's such thing as classifications of nationalism. So the fictitious jurisdictions drawn by the West fail to acknowledge divides in culture and sect, and Sunni-Shia divide and the conflict are directly a result of this. This is evident in a private conversation that was leaked between former head of MI6, Richard Dearlove, and Saudi Prince Bandar, who told him, God help the Shia, more than 1 billion Sunnis have simply had enough of them. This is the legacy of the West's imposition of a political system that has failed to represent both Sunnis and Shias. ISIS are therefore a legitimate part of the Middle Eastern political landscape. They are an insurgency with legitimate popular support from sects of the Sunni community that the political structures and states that the West imposed and failed to cater for. Flash forward to the contemporary situation in Syria. of which I'll give you a brief overview as I'm aware that my colleagues will cover this. By funding the training of Syrian rebels that have later become ISIS militants, the US has played a significant role in building up their military strength and strategic skills. The involvement of major non-member allies of NATO who claim to conform to mutual...
On that point, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
Are you suggesting that the US had previous knowledge that the people that they trained would simply walk into ISIS assignments?
No, but I'm under the impression that their allies in the region are actually still funding them and they're meant to be representing our values and Western values in the region. So, they claim to conform to mutual defence pact of the West, and they've been scuttled through the admission of America's top military general, Martin E. Dempsey, that Qatar, Jordan, Saudi Arabia and Turkey have sold weapons either directly or indirectly to militants. These are nations who are supposed to advocate in the interests of the NATO pact and represent Western military interests in the region, and who are financially enabling the growth of ISIS and have been for years. So to conclude, the colonial legacy alone is just the tip of the iceberg into how the West has contributed to the rise of ISIS. My colleague here will go on to explain the contemporary involvement of the West, but not only how covert funding, CIA training and provision of weapons to ISIS has materialised from the West, but how our mollycoddling of the region, combined with our fear of the Eastern world, will only serve to hinder our firmer understanding of Middle Eastern cultures and identities, and our historical role in trying to create a region that benefits the West. I urge this House to consider these arguments and facts I have presented to you and support the motion that this House believes the West created ISIS. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we get another round of applause just for Jessica as well, as her roommate? It wasn't just because we were given the mic today. So first up for the opposition is Mr. Jeremy Miller, who's also our maiden speaker.
So I don't know if I'll do quite as well as Rob here, who was rapping a minute ago. But I'd like to start tonight by saying that the argument that the West is responsible for ISIS is a little bit like saying Chamberlain is responsible for World War II. Appeasement was most certainly a failed policy, foreign policy failure, but just because it didn't avert war is not necessarily the same as saying it's responsible for war. In the same way, just because Western foreign policy in the region failed to stop an organization such as Islamic State from rising to power, that is not the same as saying that it was responsible for creating it, or that, and such. So tonight I'm going to argue that circumstances and conditions that allowed Islamic State to rise to power, they predate Western intervention, and also they are independent of it. Predominantly I'm going to be focusing on Iraq because Islamic State in Iraq and Al-Sham is an organization that grew out of Islamic State in Iraq and Islamic State and Al-Qaeda in Iraq in the Anbar province. So we have to understand the history of the region, especially to make sure that we get to grips with what this conflict is actually about.
On that point, sir.
No, thank you. So I'll focus on Iraq. The weaknesses of the central government, the power vacuum, essentially allowing ISIS to rise to power in the north, and long-standing ethnic tensions in the region that ISIS has exploited, but that are independent and that predate Western intervention in the region, I would say. So to understanding Iraq, Iraq is not a country that is self-evident. It has a population that's very diverse, as my opponent here mentioned, and so we have about 75% who are Arab and 15% are Kurdish. The three main groups would be the Kurdish, the Shia, and the Sunni, because although the Kurdish are Sunni, they are not viewed as Sunni by their Arab counterparts. So it's a country that's split along many lines, and we have heard mentioned that the West has played a role in shaping its borders, tying these people together. However, this was a province of the Ottoman Empire before it became a League of Nations mandate, and essentially these borders are quite arbitrary. And this is significant in ISIS's rise to power because it means that people have been tied together with very different ethnic backgrounds and religious backgrounds. They share they share a history, but not a single unique national identity or a strong sense of national identity. And this is critical. When Islamic State first came to power, it's critical in understanding something like the fall of Mosul, a city of 1.8 million people. So we have a single city with a population roughly that of Northern Ireland that fell. It was protected by two Iraqi combat divisions, so roughly 30,000 soldiers. And most Iraqi officials estimate the number of Islamic fighters and gunmen who attacked the city at around between 1,000 and 1,500. Now, explaining, so we have to take into account that Iraq is a country that has not been able to inspire loyalty among many of its soldiers, and it is a country that has not gained the full support of the majority. Further evidence of this, under Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, the government has been Shia-dominated since 2003. And in the 2014 election, there was approximately a 40% turnout. And even with this, among this 40% turnout, Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki's coalition could not gain a majority. It gained a plurality, it gained the most votes of any other coalition, but it did not gain a majority. So this is a government that does not necessarily have a mandate of the people, but the support of the people, and thus it cannot function in itself and prevent such an organization as Islam.
Generally, the government in 2003 killed about half of the West, basically devastated the country, and was imposed by the United States rather than something that the people themselves wanted. And so the West there had far more role in that sort of power vacuum and that disengagement with the democratic process.
I understand your point. You're referring to the 2003 invasion of the United States, and I would like to say, well, I acknowledge that the West did destabilize the region by removing a dictator. Many of the ethnic tensions were in place before, and they continued after. So, if we were to discuss
on that point, so
if we were to discuss Saddam Hussein's regime, we have ethnic tensions. In 1991, he crushed two rebellions, one in the north in Kurdistan, or a region that is inhabited by the Kurds, and one in the south, the Shia-led rebellion. Saddam Hussein's Ba'athist regime was mostly favored the Sunnis. Now, I kind of lost my place. I'm sorry. Just 1 second. So, while I acknowledge your point, I would argue that many of the ethnic tensions and sectarian violence predated the U.S. offensive. So, coming back to Islamic State in the north and its northern offensive, much of the offensive was conducted with the help of Sunni militias, traditional Sunni tribes leaders. So these tensions, I mentioned the rebellions in 1991. Well, in 2005 we have a draft constitution that was rejected by Sunni leaders, but it was supported by Shia and Kurdish leaders. So we have just giving a further idea of these tensions. And after 2011, after the Americans pulled out of Iraq, we still have continued sectarian violence. So this violence was directed against civilians mostly. In 2012 we had roughly 3,200 people killed, civilians in 2013 at around 7,000. And so essentially a problem with ethnic conflict. And while I recognize your point, I would be curious of the opposition, if they would have an argument to say that the West increased sectarian tensions, or how the West went about this, because I feel like that hasn't been addressed. Well, clearly, it destabilized the region, the invasion. I don't think it could have made us. I would like to hear how you argue that it could have made the sectarian tensions worse. So ISIS has enjoyed support from a number of Sunni groups, and ironically, a number of former Ba'athists, members of Saddam Hussein's government. So this is an interesting thing, because we see people uniting not along necessarily beliefs specifically, because ISIS has a corrupted version of Islam and ideology that is completely foreign to what most people were knowing. The Ba'athists were secular in a sense, but because they identified as Sunni and because they thought the Shia government was treating them unjustly, they instead chose to align with them. So we cannot view ISIS as separate, as completely separate from a type of Sunni rebellion in the region. And in conclusion, I would just like to say that while we can acknowledge Western foreign policy failed to establish peace after the war, we cannot accuse it of breaking the peace. And it was a peace that never really existed. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. Another main speaker, so can we give a round of applause? Next up for the proposition is Mr. Kuz Khan.
Hello, everyone. So the motion of the House today is: did the West create Islamic State of Syria and Iran, ISI? The short answer is yes. Thank you very much. Now, the fact that the Western powers, and especially the USA, have long and torrid history of backing terrorist groups will only surprise those who've watched the news but ignored history. In order to understand why the Islamic State has grown and flourished so quickly, one has to take a look at the organization's American and Western-backed roots. The 2003 American invasion and occupation of Iraq created the preconditions for radical Sunni groups like ISIS to take root. America, rather unwisely, destroyed Saddam Hussein's secular state machinery and replaced it with a predominantly Shiite administration.
On that point, sir.
No, thank you. The US occupation caused vast unemployment in Sunni working areas as they lost hundreds of thousands of jobs. Rather than promoting religious integration and unity, American policy in Iraq exacerbated sectarian divisions and created a fertile breeding ground for Sunni discontent, from which Al-Qaeda in Iraq took root. Al-Qaeda in Iraq is ISIS, or ISIS as I like to call them, considering they have so many names. Why not add another one? Is where they came from. Cynical as it may sound, I must say that there is enough evidence to support that creation of ISIS wasn't just a miscalculation in foreign policy by the West, or more specifically the USA. History proves that America's relationship with terrorist groups has always been a love-hate affair. Depending on whether a particular terrorist group in a given region furthers American interests or not, the US State Department either funds it or aggressively targets the terrorist group, and it's the same in ISIS's case. They initially funded it and supported it, provided it with weapons and all the support that they could to bring down the Bashar al-Assad regime, and when it started going against Western interest, they started targeting it. And it's done it a lot of times before in the past. During the 1970s, CIA used the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt as a barrier to Soviet expansion. They openly supported Sarakat Islam against Sukarno in Indonesia. They supported Jamaat Islami terror group against Zulfikar Ali Bhutto in Pakistan. Last, but certainly not the least, Al-Qaeda in 1980s. And as we all know, ISIS is just like Al-Qaeda and really just an offshoot. And the only difference there is in the tactics and the aims of having an Islamic state that is run by Sharia law. There is even more evidence to actually see the support of West towards these rebel groups now in the Middle East. It's a very recent finding, I think it's only last month, a declassified secret US government document obtained by the public interest law firm Judicial Watch shows that Western governments deliberately allied with Al-Qaeda and other Islamist groups to topple Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad. And this is despite anticipating that doing so could lead to the emergence of an Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. ISI. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, you mentioned that document. Wasn't that referred to as the FSA?
No, it wasn't.
Are you sure?
It was not referred to FSA. I'm very sure. I read it at 5 p.m. because I wrote this at 5 p.m. It wasn't referred to FSA. It was referred to as most terrorist or Islamist extremist groups. And it was in light of everything that the West, or in particular, let's just say USA, was doing to support these groups. Yes, I can confirm it wasn't just the FSA.
Thank you.
Found where I was. Closer to home, there is further evidence, I'm running out of time, of Western support. The trial of London of a Swedish man, Berling Gildo, accused of terrorist acts in Syria. collapsed after it became clear that British intelligence had been arming the same rebel groups the defendant was charged with supporting. So there is enough proof that the West uses terrorism and therefore commits terrorist acts internationally. In fact, even the director of National Security Agency under Ronald Reagan remarked that by any measure the US has long used terrorism. And in the late 80s, the Senate was trying to pass a law in America against international terrorism, and the lawyers in the US said, in any case, US would be in violation of this law if it was passed. So that is clear evidence of what America develops as its international policy. What's next? This is very sad. The rest is pretty sad too. We are now actually helping in funding Islamic State. The same year that ISIS actually took control of the oil fields in Deir al-Zor and Hasaka, EU voted, coincidentally, to ease an oil embargo on Syria to allow oil to be sold on international markets. In early September last year, European Union's ambassador to Iraq, Jana Hibaskova, told EU Foreign Affairs Committee that several EU member states have bought oil from Islamic State, and Reuters revealed that Israeli and US oil refineries have been regularly purchasing oil from them. So basically, filling in the pockets of this horrible organization. To summarize very quickly now, there are essentially 3 wars being waged in Syria. One between the government and the rebels, government being the Assad regime. Another between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and yet another between America and Russia. This is all America's neoconservative vision of politicizing, dividing and ruling just to take control over the oil and strategic point of view. Can't answer the question now. Guys, don't ignore the history, don't ignore the evidence. Vote for that this House created Islamic State of Syria and Iraq, ISIL. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And it's now. Okay, so now for our second speaker for the opposition is Captain Kieran Gallagher.
Madam President, Pro Vice Chancellor, ladies and gentlemen, and those of a non-binary gender, good evening. Right. I was quite nervous actually while writing this speech because I actually thought it would be much more heated than it's turned out to be. But it's not over yet, I guess. I'm not going to stand here and be an apologist for the West and the many failings and blunders it's had here, in other parts of the world, in the Middle East. But I do think the motion, but it's mild, this is far too simple. And what's more, I think, despite the fact you could at least argue, I suppose, that the West has played a part in raising circumstances from which the likes of people from ISIS would draw an opportunity. You would have to, in order to agree with this motion, I would suggest you do have to reach the point that it outweighs all the other factors in this. Or to put it another way, it's an exaggeration at best of a fraction of the truth, and certainly a distraction from the rest of it, but time is limited. First of all, this is all about the West. Well, clearly not. With or without the West, I do put it to you, ladies and gentlemen, there is plenty of quarrels in the Middle East. We all know this. But I guess you also have to draw, when you're talking about groups like this, extreme fascists of this kind, you do at least have to take into account some aspect of what they claim is the issue. Now, they do say things like, we blame the West on a number of charges. Iraq War is one of them, the Crusades is another, and there's a whole list of them. And there are others that actually I would certainly disagree with. Go ahead, actually, yes.
Could you explain how Crusades have anything to do with this?
Sorry, could you speak up, please?
Could you please explain how Crusades have any relevance to what we're discussing now?
You'd have to ask ISIS, I don't think. But if you look into what ISIS do say, who else do they blame? And who do they blame and reason or give themselves permission for these crimes? If it's all about the West, where does the anti-Semitism come from? If it's all about the West, where does this sectarianism about Sunnis and Shias come from? Why are the people being stopped on the side of the road and asked in Iraq and Syria, how many times a day do you pray on a Friday? What has that got to do with the West? Yes, go on.
So you're saying the West is a catalyst or a scapegoat for more regional...
Well, I do think, as I say, the West, I'm no expert on the Iraq War, or I'm sure there are people on this table who know more about the West's blunders. I wouldn't deny any of them. But I am saying what we could say is that, no, not right now, thank you. What we could say, though, is we do make mistakes, but we do manage to get some things right, too. We have propped up dictators in the past, but we also have removed them. I suggest we do have, not right now, thank you. I would suggest we have the antidote to poisons within us, lazialism, if we're calling ourselves the West. Could we say the same thing about ISIS? Bearing in mind, okay, go on.
What dictator have we taken, military dictator, have we ousted and then made it a better situation in the country?
Glad you asked. Glad you asked. This is a crux of it, actually. Let's take Iraq, for example. Now, whether or not you agree with Iraq being, or the whatever you want to call the intervention in Iraq, as being a good thing or a bad thing, that's a whole other debate. I'm not really going to get into that. But would we not at least agree it's depressing to say that if we didn't go into Iraq, that if we look at it in retrospect, is it not depressing to say that Iraq required a psychopathic foe to hold it together? And even after we did remove him, there was a government in place that represented perhaps a little better the sheer majority of that region. And now it's collapsed. But I do think it's important to say, I get tired of when people say, yeah, okay, Saddam Hussein was a bad guy. Saddam Hussein broke all four of the forfeits by which a country can be said to lose its sovereignty, things like breaking the Genocide Convention, breaking the Non-Proliferation Treaties, and I actually can't remember the other two. I'm going to press on because this is how I always lose my time. But here's the other thing. You also have to ask yourselves, what do we have to do not to make situations work? What situation, how dire do situations need to get before we say, okay, we have to take a risk and intervene, or play some part in how the Middle East is governed? Okay.
Never. I'll just say never. It's
Never.
Not our business, no.
Okay. Okay, well, let's take the Middle East. I'm down to my last minute, haven't I?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll wrap this up with a few last points. Taking the not intervening in other countries. If you're a total pacifist and you are a non-interventionist, I can understand that. But unless you can say that about yourself, I do say you make an error. Why is it, for example, that in the manifestos of people like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, they blame the West, for example, for East Timor? East Timor was a country beside Indonesia, colonized by Portugal in the 16th century, and in 1975 it declared its own independence. It was occupied that very same year by Indonesia, bringing on decades-long violence, sometimes described as a genocide. And then in 1999, after a long time and many lives lost, the UN intervened and relinquished Indonesian control. This was the third thing, for example, on Al-Qaeda's manifesto. What do you have to do not to incur the wrath of extreme people like this? The last thing I'll say is I'll actually wrap up with something. I'll wrap up with one last quote from a person called Majid Nawaz. You may have heard of him. He's a British Muslim who used to belong to an extreme sect himself. This is my last sentence. And he said, to blame, he takes part basically in telling Muslims and Muslim extremists that.
Just sit down.
Okay, goodbye. One last it was a half-truth narrative.
Okay, after that very brief speech, I'd like to welcome another maiden speaker and our third speaker for the proposition, Mr. Jake Morris.
I'd like to start off by giving out to Jeremy. These Texans were always there along the ethnic sectarian lines, and under the Saddam Hussein regime, they were repressed so badly that unless you were Kurdish, it was alright. Unless you were Kurdish, there was no sectarian violence ongoing. So that's what I'd like to start off with. So basically, the group that became what ISIS is today began in 1989 as its origins actually. Received money from Bin Laden in the camp in Afghanistan, entered into the militant to right now the State Kingdom. But basically, it's Shias and so let's get to Iraq. In Iraq, the coalition invaded Iraq in March 2003.
On that point, sir.
Yeah.
It's up to you if you want to take it.
Are you okay? You seem to, like, you're very open in statement. You were talking about that there was no sectarian violence in Iraq under the Saddam regime. Okay.
No.
But no.
They wouldn't have tolerated it.
Okay, right. So the regime didn't tolerate it. The regime wouldn't tolerate it. Okay. Do you need to talk? Do I need to even reference the activities of Saddam's secret police, the Special Republican Guard, any of those men, and the hundreds of thousands of people that were killed by the Saddam regime who disappeared, and even the Kurds you mentioned them in 1988 were gassed, and 5,000 died now. No, I don't know if you're apologising. Sorry.
But I'm basically just saying the sectarian violence that we see today did not occur then because of the repressive nature of the regime. So you take away that regime, there's your catalyst for what's happening today. It wouldn't have happened because that regime would not have allowed it to happen. But we went and got that down and this happened. But basically, anyway, so this group began by August 2003. They were fighting the coalition forces. Their main targets, and they've listed their targets as Shiite religious clerics and civilians, Kurdish clerics and civilians, foreign contractors, UN workers, the interim government officials, and the Iraqi security and coalition forces. All of these people were targets. And they joined Al-Qaeda, and then they split off from Al-Qaeda because their interpretation of Islamic takfir said that Shiites should be killed. Al-Qaeda didn't necessarily agree with that. Then this leader was killed in an airstrike in June 2006, and the Egyptian Salafist Abu Ayyub al-Mazri assumed the leadership. After that, it became the Islamic State of Iraq in October 2006, and Abu Omar al-Baghdadi was chosen as the emir. At this stage, they went into it. They claimed that they had Baghdad, Al-Anbar, Diyala, Kirkuk, Salahadin, Nineveh, and parts of Babel as the claim for the new caliphate. So that was the foundations of the caliphate that were established then. Protests in Libya in the Arab Spring, Syria and Libya, that allowed them a platform to take the fight out of Iraq. Then the US withdrawal from Iraq allowed them to a platform because the Sunnis didn't like the new Shia interim government. In Syria, they ploughed full of weapons, and obviously these fell into hands. The West didn't intend them to get into these hands, but they were into these hands, and now they've claimed over half of Syria.
On this point, sir.
Yeah.
Can you just specify where the West fits in all this? You mentioned the popular uprisings. I personally see that as a local event. How did the West fit in all of this?
Basically, invading Iraq, bringing down that repressive regime, allowed this sectarian violence to occur. Then you supported the side, you took down Gaddafi, allowing what's happening in Libya to occur. And then you went and supported the uprising against the secular government of Assad, allowing what's happened in Syria to occur. Is there another question over there?
We voted against military action in Syria.
Not we, the West. Yes, but our support in having weapons. You know, if we hadn't ploughed them full of weapons, given them training, given them access to these guns, would they have become what they've become? So basically, this is the fallout of the West taking the wrong sides, and pretty much everything else I want to say has been said.
I'm just like another maiden speaker, so we give a round of applause. And now for our third speaker for the proposition, Dr. Craig Miller.
I got told not to ignore the history, so I went and looked at some history. I don't like history, to be honest with you. I find it quite boring going back nearly 1,259 years to correct first prop. But the first sectarian war was in 657 CE in the Euphrates. The second one was in 680 CE. It was 1,259 years out of date. This has got very little to do with the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And to say that the West has caused this problem literally just propagates, reconfirms the ill thoughts the East has towards the West. It just shows the arrogance that we have to say that the West can even create this beast. It shows the misguided knowledge of the entire region. Today I'm going to frame my argument around three main points. What's going on in Yemen, the genesis of IS, which Kuz has just got completely wrong, and the way that the place is funded. Look, as a simple man, I really did want to get up here and just say this is all to do with sectarianism, but I enjoy talking, so I'm going to carry on doing justice. No. However, it's essential to realise that sectarianism has gone on in this region for 1,300 years. 1,300 years. This has got very little to do with us going in to Iraq in 2003. Yes, that made the situation worse, but it's got very little to do with the creation of this beast. No.
No bar.
Now, in Yemen, you've got two things going on. You've got the government versus the Houthi rebels. The Houthi rebels are backed by Iran. They are. The government, which is backed by Saudi Arabia. Did any of these countries ring a bell? It's exactly what is going on in Iraq right now, but we don't say that the West is causing the Yemen civil war. So why are we saying that the West is creating the issue of ISIS? ISIS are in Yemen. They got created in 1996, before we went in 2003. Kuz gets up and he basically states that IS were Al-Qaeda in Iraq. This is not what's happened. What's happened is IS were created. They wanted a bit of traction. They joined Al Qaeda. They joined Al Qaeda in Iraq. They then left Al Qaeda. Yes.
Who created Al Qaeda and all the other similar organisations? 5 of them I mentioned in the last 40 years. The West.
They've created.
There's no responding.
They've created themselves for their hatred for each other. They go around bombing each other's mosques. Now, it is this common fallacy that IS was created from a branch off of Al Qaeda. We know that's not what's happened. There's 2 fundamental differences between IS and Al Qaeda. IS want a Sunni-dominated caliphate, whereas Al Qaeda want to take over the world with global jihadism. They're not too bothered about the Sunni Shiite sectarianism. They're completely different. They've got different issues, and Al Qaeda and IS wanted to use the Al Qaeda traction. It was done with backhanded deals without the West's influence. Al Qaeda in Iraq was, by definition, created, like I say, in 1996, before we went into Iraq. They were created 7 years earlier.
On that point?
Yeah.
The West's involvement sorry. The West's involvement in the Middle East goes much further back than the Iraq invasion.
As far as we're concerned, the West involvement goes back to the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which is in 1916, when the First War there started in 657 CE. So I'm sorry, you're just losing 1,300 years of history.
On that point, sir.
Finally, and to me the most important point, which is the way that the thing is funded. Now, with all the will in the world, there might be a vacuum that's been created because we didn't instill the best government possible. Right, but with all the will in the world, if you don't have the money, you can't do a thing. Now, IS fund all their activity through rich people donating money through Qatar. They don't use Western banks. They put it through the typical smuggling routes that have been going on in the last 1,300 years. The Emir of Qatar's even said this. The only question we need to ask is whether or not the Qatari government and the Saudi government are also complicit in giving them money. Now, if we came out here and stated that Qatar and Saudi are the West, then fine, and I did want to clarify that with first prop, but she said that it wasn't part of the West, so fine, we can accept that the Sunni governments in Qatar and Saudi are actually part of the East. They're the ones who I believe are funding the problem. They believe the people are funding the problem, the governments are stating that. So it's a toss-up between whether it's the governments or the people that have created the money that has allowed these people to do what they want to do. Yeah.
On that point, sorry.
Sorry. Trading from contraband and battlefield gains and kidnaps has accelerated the issue in terms of the amount of money they have. And then we get on to the Hop's favourite argument, which is oil. Now, second prop stated that the EU loosened the deals with Syria in terms of where we can get the oil from, but most of the oil that's coming out of ISIS is going straight into Turkey. It's not coming. That's not coming into the EU. So you're getting again your cash flow wrong. I believe with the money, the sectarianism that's going on there, it's conclusive evidence that the West, albeit not the greatest player in the region, and I'm not going to defend going into Iraq. I'm not going to do that as much as I want to. They didn't create ISIS. It was created. Okay, it was there. Okay, yes. Leaving a vacuum allowed ISIS to become the beast that they wanted to be. They became that beast with money from Qatar and money from Saudi. They then went on an absolute mission to start slaughtering anyone that wasn't Sunni Muslim. Now, I urge you to vote with Bob. I urge you to actually, as second prop would say, look at the history.
Thank you very much. And now to close for the proposition is Mr. Owen Rice.
I'm not going to be able to follow that
that so well, but I'll try my best now. Basically, a lot of what I'm going to be saying is a reiteration on what my colleagues on the proposition have been saying. Jessica said that, for example, colonial divisions are an important aspect to consider as part of the destabilisation of the region. Like, this isn't just the Middle East, for example. If you consider, for example, Africa, colonial divisions of land have created conflict sort of near enough everywhere in the world, because it's essentially what they are doing is they're dividing land that suits themselves rather than what would suit the native ethnic populations. This vacuum left by culture is basically due to divisions of states split along colonial lines, not ethnic lines. Also, this sort of links back to realist IR. Dictators in that region are basically the ones that aren't facing a lot of opposition or attempting to be overthrown, are the dictators that essentially we want to be there. You don't notice, for example, the Saudis aren't getting too much trouble out of this whole thing. A lot of other governments aren't. But I don't know.
I was first minute.
Some dictators are better than others. Some dictators aren't actually all that bad.
Alright, but that's exactly it. They're our friends. So, they are, I can't curse here, but they're not nice people, because they're our friends, keep them. That's how it works everywhere. Don't, think this is just us. But there has been training of rebels has been due to the US and their allies. There was one particular example I read about a training camp in the north of Jordan that it was supposedly to train moderate opposition. I don't know how moderate they were exactly. And what Khan has said is that Western powers have been shown throughout history to back terrorism and proxy wars. This isn't just the West. This has happened basically throughout history. You do have larger, more powerful nations backing rebel groups in other countries. For example, the Spanish even backed the Irish in the 9-Year War. But this is all because, as he rightly points out, America basically destroyed the whole society of Iraq through the war. One particular example, many jobs were lost, and this only made the problem worse, was they disbanded the Iraq army, and the thousands and thousands of people, one of the biggest armies in the region, they gave the people no alternative employment or no subsidies. It basically just says, just go out on the street, do whatever, doesn't really matter. Now, if you go into a country, basically destroy the whole society, overthrow the government, and you're seen as like the bad guys, and not only that, you have no support from the local army, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that's not going to end well.
Didn't we do that in Germany?
Yeah, didn't exactly end well the first time. The second time it ended well because we stayed there and occupied the country for years and years, and basically, yeah. But as he said, this is just another example, basically, of just arbitrary foreign policy. People seem to think that there's things like the UN, international law. Well, who's actually enforcing this stuff? It's other countries. It's basically just more powerful countries have the ability to enforce it, so they just enforce the bits they like, just leave the rest of it. If it's not working, why would you bother enforcing, for example, an international law if you have to enforce it yourself? It's going to hinder you. You just say, I'm not going to bother with that. Like, as he rightly points out, there's 3 different wars in Syria because of this. But move on anyway to the rebuttal. Jeremy, to rebuttal his argument, these circumstances do actually predate Western intervention. Because of intervention in Iraq, the weakness of the government, it doesn't take into account the destabilisation of the region. Destabilising the region that is multicultural, and especially once you actually consider the fragile nature of the entire Middle East, it doesn't make sense that you would go into a country and destabilise it. And as he already points out, the Iraqi government wasn't popular. Saddam was a really bad person, to say the least, and the Ba'athist Party were very biased in favour of the Sunni majority. But the thing is that you do actually need a strong state in these situations, even though they will discriminate against people. That is what happens. This is why, for example, we should be supporting, if any group, the Kurds. Once you divide, as Craig said earlier as well, ethno-nationalism tends to work best in these situations. Although that's a completely separate argument altogether. But how has it made sectarian tensions worse? Well, basically, the idea of sovereignty is that a single state can keep control when single state collapses, it allows a power vacuum to emerge. All these sort of groups then, in particular, if it's, as Jessica said, divided along arbitrary colonial divisions, this will just mean an ethnic conflict. For example, Rwanda, I know that's a different thing, but it's just for example. Kieran also admits that the West has played a part, but he's not fully admitting this. He rightly points out the Middle East.
On that point, sir.
Yeah, go on ahead.
Thanks. You talk about how the West's role here in splitting up cultures and stuff, and I know that Islam is heavily embedded into these cultures, but how can the West have any influence over that religious element?
It doesn't. So
you just mentioned
the back and forth.
Well, basically it doesn't. I mean, religious elements have always existed, but as Craig says, ethno-nationalism is probably the best thing that can exist in this region.
Not say that.
Well, you made a mistake. You brought the point up. Right, but he shows how important. I'm sorry, wrong with this. It is a volatile region, and it shows how important stable government is, even though it probably isn't the best. You're probably never going to get it 100% right, but we do only basically install governments in this region that we want to be there for our own interest. The man in the audience also said we haven't actually overthrew any sort of dictator that's effectively made the situation in any country worse. And basically intervention in any sort of country nowadays, humanitarian interventions, or whether, I can't really say this word, but it's BS. I'm sure you know what that means. If this was true, basically every country in the world would be sanctioned or have some sort of intervention. It just, as I said, it just reflects the balance of power. And democracy is not universal. You won't actually be able to get people in these countries to accept it. The reason that we accept it here is because of centuries and centuries of war and cultural and political revolutions. But it's important to point out much of the threat is that we're going.
27.
Please vote for us.
Okay, and now to the final speaker of the opposition and to close the debate is Mr. Graham Rice.
Thank you very much. Honourable guests, member of the committee, Vice Chancellor, and Madam Chairperson. I'd like to start off here with just a statement. ISIS want to create a nuclear holocaust on the West. Now, the person who said that was Jürgen Goldmacher, who spent 10 days with the Islamic State in Syria or Iraq, I believe. He spent 10 days embedded with them, defended their ideologies and such. So just keep that in mind as we go along. I'd like to start here by just rebutting a couple of points we came across here. So, one frequent point that's been coming across is that the CIA trained and equipped ISIS and they give them arms and stuff. Well, I took part in with a specialist consultancy into the sources and mechanisms of supply of the Islamic State. We found that it was quite varied. There was a lot of grey and black material there that we weren't able to source. But we found that the majority of the arms were seized through battlefield capture being one, the looting of Iraqi army stocks, and mergers and acquisitions with other armed groups. And I referenced one of the our latest betrayals, if you like, and that is the US trained Division 30. Heard of that? Who recently handed over the weapons and surrendered to the Islamic State for free passage across their territory. So we see here that the mechanisms of supply for the Islamic State are very varied, and I'll give them that it is quite grey and some things we can't confirm, but we definitely know that Saudi Arabia have a part in that, and to a certain extent, but this is confirmed again, Turkey. So, please.
If taking Saudi Arabia or like non-member allies of the West, and that's going to be advocating military values of the West, then aren't they essentially working on behalf of businesses?
Absolutely not. No way. Again, let me just reference back to the fact that ISIS is anti-Western, it's anti-democratic. Why would the US knowingly support an organisation like that? Even if it was through their ally Saudi Arabia, they wouldn't tolerate it, which means that Saudi Arabia are going behind their back to a certain extent. No, fine. Here we go, right? The proposition second speaker, Khan. You mentioned that America was wrong to remove Saddam Hussein from power, and then that was supported by Owen here. Now, I do quite agree that nation states are very important and that they should be maintained to a large extent. However, I'm going to be no advocate for the Saddam regime at all, and I think he should have been left. I think he should have left without having to be. That is the way democracy works. And the West fights for democracy. We did fight for democracy.
Well, we say
There's
we
no
fight for
hassle,
democracy.
So, yes, during the 1980s we see the US support, not the 1980s, but Kenneth again mentioned that secret document that he mentioned about the Islamic State and how the United States supports them. This is simply unfounded. I think it's absolutely ridiculous to suggest that the United States supports an organisation that wants to destroy Western democratic ideals. That's
On that point.
I'll just start off now by talking about the genesis of ISIS and such. So it is very highly complex, I'll give you that. It does predate Western intervention. It definitely does. That's undeniable. The genesis of ISIS certainly requires possibly the influence of the West to galvanise its cause, but it's not the creator of it. It didn't. Somebody in the West didn't decide, just create this Islamist organisation to destroy us all. No thanks. So I'm going to talk a bit about Salafism. I'm not too sure if there's any experts in Salafism here. I hope not. But I hope I got the gist here. So Salafism, which is the primary influence for ISIS, is anti-democratic. I've already mentioned the West has fought for democracy numerous times. It's anti-freedom. No thank you. It's anti-freedom of speech. So it doesn't advocate that. They're one of the rights which I wouldn't be able to stand here, for example, and bash Salafism if ISIS were controlling this region. The biggest supporters of the ideology are in the Middle East. There's no supporters of Salafism in the United States. Similarly, the fact that ISIS and the Islamic State have always been the focus of ISIS and the Islamic State, I'll use those terms interchangeably, has always been on its local region. Just bear that in mind.
On that point, so.
Just don't want to waste time, sorry. So they've always been focused on the so-called near enemies. While the far enemies do feature in some of their talks, the near enemies are the ones that mostly talked about. This can be further reinforced by the ideology has been said by one of the most influential people in ISIS and the creation of ISIS has been Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, who was a significant influence on that there. He was a radical. He was frankly innocuous. Quite right, Cam. He was. I think it was you mentioned he was killed in 2006.
No, I didn't.
Sorry, was it yourself? Yeah. Yes, he was killed in 2006. 2 500-pound bombs decided to end a visit in the night, and he was killed in that attack. He had this belief that in order for an organisation to gain more members, it had to become more extreme and more, had to become totally unreasonable to gain the most extreme members that wouldn't give up the fight. We see that in ISIS today. The current leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, has really? Wow. Anyway, sorry. Yes, I'm going to cut it short there. But yes, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, plenty of anti-Western rhetoric in there. I don't see how the West could in some way, either indirectly or directly, support such rhetoric. And yes, I will acknowledge that the US was probably blinded or deceived in the way that the Saudis have supplied arms to ISIS, but they're certainly not the creators of ISIS. They may give ISIS an enemy in terms of wanting to galvanise its cause, but they are certainly by no means the creators. We've already heard the arguments here that indeed sectarianism in the Middle East is rife and has been there since the beginning of time, basically. I'd just like to make sure that point gets across. But yes, and I think that's nearly good. Yeah. So I'll just stretch it a little bit longer if I can. Actually, I will, because that's stuff. But thank you very much.
Steve? Okay, well, thank you very much. Pens, anybody? Okay, so thank you for that there. I forgot to mention at the start, we're on Twitter, Facebook, website, Snapchat. So QB Literific, apart from Facebook, which is the Literific, sorry. But thank you for all your speeches. I hope you all enjoyed it. It's all a bit more informed, I suppose, about the topic as well. And we're now going to ask for a few questions from the audience. So first question will be the proposition, second will be the opposition, and then a point on motion. So please stand up, state your name for the minutes, and address which side of the question you're speaking to. Okay? So anyone got any questions for the proposition? Yes?
So I think overall there has been an agreement on both sides that there's maybe a catalyst from the West, but you keep speaking about the colonial influence, and actually, could it be seen as a colonial chauvinistic thing to say that the West caused it? Like, we are so big and so powerful and so amazing that we caused you to have all these wars. Is it actually fair that it wasn't a cause?
Yeah, I can take that one. I think that it's important to sort of note as well that there was actually a few hundred years of peace in the Ottoman Empire where they didn't and it was only after the lines were drawn in the Stanley and Sykes-Picot Agreement where a lot of these conflicts started up again after a few thousand years of peace. I think that there's a lot of things, including like our interest of trade and oil in the region, that have also spurred on our involvement, and I think that the fact that America is the unipolar sort of hegemon in the world, I think that them having the biggest influence, I think that you can say that the West did cause ISIS.
Thank you. We're going to skip responses just because we're time to run on. So do we have any questions for the opposition? Yes, can you state your name for the minutes, please?
Joe, basically, like, remember in 9/11, 3,000 innocent civilians were killed, yeah? And how radicalised the American people were against the Muslim world, invaded 3 different countries, and then you turn around and say to these Iraqi people, well, don't become radicalised, we're going to kill 1.5 million of civilians, take it down to 70. You know, I think it's a bit of an unfair sort of situation. You've got to accept that
Can I just point out that ISIS stands for the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. Syria certainly wasn't invaded by the West, as far as I know. That's entirely misinformed. Yes, but no, I do acknowledge that, yes, we've already said this, that the United States made some bad calls. We know that. We know that. And sorry to just summarise it as bad calls of 1 million deaths. No, I don't mean to do that. Things could be done better. That is certainly true. However, we have to acknowledge that ISIS is from Syria and Iraq. There is influences on both sides there, so we have to look at that as well.
And do we have any sort of neutral points on the motion? Sort of. No, you all just want to fight to them. Oh, yes. Please stand up and state your name.
My name's Bradley. I was slightly amused to hear that some people seem to think to prove that the West had created ISIS, they had to have evidence of them literally giving them guns. I think the argument about the West kind of galvanised and gave ISIS kind of a reason to exist, I think that's probably actually much more important in terms of causing ISIS in the first place.
Can we have a short response from each side on that point? Do you have any? Nope. Okay. So next point to the proposition. Yes?
Sorry, I'd just like the proposition to justify their claim that foreign intervention is never justifiable.
Countries don't work that way. Countries, basically, a nation state will work for the interest of itself. That has always been the way. If you look throughout history, that has literally always been the way. It doesn't sound nice, it's not nice, but that is literally the way of it. If you, there's no other way of explaining it.
And question for the opposition? Yes, just have to say your full name, sorry.
Full name Conor Paul. I sort of have 2 points, but they're intertwined. Firstly, Kieran mentioned about East Timor, which was invaded and genocide essentially was committed by Indonesia under the guise of General Suharto, I believe his name was. He was actually supported militarily and politically by both Britain and the United States in the 1970s. And so that brings me on to the point about this kind of idea that's it's kind of been across the board a little bit, but it's mostly on the opposition, the idea of like Western benevolence. We were trying to do the right thing, but we just blundered. But if you look at sort of history of great powers, you have like the Spanish conquistadors supposedly wanted to bring like Christianity to the savages. Britain wanted to sort of civilize the world, there was an empire. Even like Russia, when it was meant to be a security mission when they went into Afghanistan, great powers always claim benevolence. But really it's actually about control if you look through history, and I don't see why it's any different for the West and for the United States whenever there's a great power. And so I'd like sort of an explanation of why I think that is, why it's so unique in history.
I'm not going to tackle your East Timor point, but I want to take on the second point of that. And I would say the West probably do have some blame to play, but probably completely different to, I'd say, every other person in this room. Obama should never have pulled out troops, and then when we had a vote in England, Labour and Lib Dem should never have not voted for strikes in Syria. If we had strikes in Syria, we would not have had the mess we've got now.
So, opposition, do you have any points? Yes, Stefan?
Could we, I don't know whether the proposition or the opposition will agree, but could we just blame it on Kemal Atatürk? Yeah, probably.
I'm perfectly okay with that.
Sorry, point of clarification.
Yeah, I just,
Could we just blame it all on Kemal Atatürk? If he maintained the caliphate, maybe the president of Turkey will also be caliph of the faithful. Would we not have the mess that we have here if Turkey was not a secular country and it was a leader in the Muslim world?
Okay, thank you. I'm not quite sure I understand that point, but everybody else probably in the suggestion box. Do we have a short response from proposition versus non-opposition? No, opposition, go for it.
The theme here seems to be like we are saying that if we had done this, it would have worked out like this. Things don't work out like that. We know that. What we are dealing with now is what we are dealing with now. We have to deal with it now. We can't sit there and say that if we had done this, it would have worked out perfectly like that. That's not how it works. We're dealing with ISIS now, and will be, until they're totally defeated, which I hope is soon, and that's it.
Yes, briefly.
We are not dealing with this now. The motion is we created ISIS, so all the arguments presented can include the past events. So yes, we can discuss everything that has led to the formation of ISIS.
Okay, thank you. We'll go on to one last round of questions, and then we get Mr. Gallagher, Professor Gallagher, to sum up. So, question for the proposition. Yes, please.
Thank you. Was the real cause of the creation of IS not the Arab Spring?
Please get your name for the minutes now, sir.
Michael.
We have a very good answer. No, you take it.
Well, you take it.
I'll take it then.
Should we like flip a coin or something?
Right. Be a later.
Basically, it's a from the opportunity that did exist before. They did exist in Iraq since roughly, I think it was the time. It gave them basically the opportunity, without which they wouldn't have been able to do that.
So Wasn't the West?
Well, the West did have some influence in creating the Arab Springs. You have to take that into account.
Do you want to quickly respond?
Can I just want to respond to Owen's point. Again, I'm going to emphasise the fact that the Arab Spring, for me, I mean personally, obviously I'm not speaking with like loads of facts here, but the Arab Spring is a local phenomenon. That's what I see it as. And it's just, that's just a response to Tone.
And a question for the opposition. Yes, say your name for justice.
If the Syrian regime, as it is now, had been deposed, as it has been suggested by the opposition, would that not have resulted in a skewed political and revolutionary landscape as it has with Iraq? I'd like to hear a response.
Can you clarify? What is it that you're? Nah, I don't know. Can you clarify what you mean by that? Like you say a skewed political environment.
As it has been said, we could have avoided this entire mess in the Middle East if we had intervened in Syria, right? When there was supposed to be a vote in the House of Commons and it was rejected. So I'm just wondering if, or how do you feel? Would that have avoided even the messy situation that we have now?
So if we had intervened, it would have.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Airstrikes in Syria was allowing airstrikes in Syria was more a reference to fighting Islamic State than necessarily opposing Assad immediately, because this wasn't allowed. We created a situation where, while Islamic State was operating without a border between Syria and Iraq, British forces could only attack Islamic State in Iraq. So I'm not sure if what we spoke of was a reference to opposing Assad, but as most certainly with any regime change, there would be risks associated with that, and I would agree with you that those risks would be present.
Okay, and we have a final brief comment on the motion. Yes, Emma?
Despite something of a lack of energy tonight, I do think we've had a really informative debate, and it seems to have centred around this word created. Both sides of the House seem to agree that the West has had some kind of influence and has perhaps worsened the state, but neither can really say if they have created or not. So I wondered if both sides of the opposition could maybe give me a definition of that word created and why it supports their side of the motion.
Proposition go first and then brief from opposition.
Well, I thought by created we meant that whatever it requires to cause people to come together and join such an organisation, to make it an organisation, was caused by the West. And as you have heard in the speech I made, I provided you with the reasons why the West, that they did give them those reasons to come together and form the organisations. If you'd like me to repeat what I said, I'll do that happily. Do you want me to?
Good, thanks. Very briefly.
I'm glad actually this was asked. It was a point I never made. Yeah.
Today would be nice.
I'll do my best. Cheeky bastard.
Just briefly, I'm not sure if you are aware that you can be fined for use of obscenity, and the fine is 1 bottle of port.
Hey. Graciously given.
Lenient today.
The definition of the word create is, in fact, to cause to come into being as something unique that would not naturally evolve or that is not made by ordinary processes. Are we seriously saying that if the West had nothing to do in recent times with the Middle East, that we wouldn't have angry, violent militias and uprisings every now and again? If it wasn't ISIS, it would be someone else. It would be something else. This is a case of violent, internal, vicious politics. The West has played its part. It's messed up in some areas, but maybe we do try and control it but at least we have some decent ideas on human solidarity. We are not the ones who go and kill people based on their particular sect.
All our questions now. Before we head off with the bar and we can discuss it further, I'd just like to get a summary from Professor Gallagher.
Okay, well, can I just begin by saying thank you very much for inviting me to come along this evening. I always enjoy these debates. The Literific is one of the oldest student societies in the university, which makes it very, very important. It's also, by its very definition, one of the most erudite student societies, which is also a worthy claim. And since its revival in 2011, it has been developing a tradition of being one of the best dressed student societies as well, which are one or two other people in the audience are helping to live up to today. Okay, so this debate was very interesting. What the debate really revolves around is the extent to which we accept a long-standing principle many will have heard of, post hoc ergo propter hoc. Because one thing follows another. Is it responsible of is the thing that follows a response caused by the thing that came first? In this particular instance, there's three possible ways in which this might be put into play. I think there's general agreement by everyone that the rise of ISIS is linked in some way to the political instability in the region. And political instability in the region has been caused, at least to some extent, by the involvement of the West. So you have the West's role, political instability, and the rise of ISIS. So there's three possible circumstances that can follow from that. One is that the West has no direct responsibility of any kind. The second is that the West is indirectly responsible, or the third is that the West is directly responsible. Now, we did hear an argument around the third of these, that the West was directly responsible. We heard some evidence suggested that the West had funded and armed and supported some of the groups that became ISIS or that was ISIS. We also heard some arguments directly attempting to refute that. But if you found the evidence that the West directly was involved in supporting in any way ISIS, then you would support the proposition. Then there's the view that the West had no responsibility of any kind. In this view, we heard the argument that this is a region where these types of debates, these types of conflicts have been on for over 1,000 years. There's an inevitability about these conflicts, and the fact that the West was involved in these particular circumstances in the grander scale of history was largely irrelevant. It would have happened anyway. And if you accept that position, then you would oppose the motion. But the majority of the argument centred around the issue of indirect responsibility, because most of the speakers, even when they were making a case for full direct or no responsibility, most of the speakers acknowledged to some extent that the West carried some degree of indirect responsibility. So the question is, what is the burden of that indirect responsibility? One argument put forward by the proposition was that the West created the conditions that made it more likely that something like ISIS would come about. It may not have intended that to happen, but that was the consequence of the action that the West carried out in the region, and therefore made it more likely that ISIS would come into being and do all the things that it was doing, and therefore does carry a burden of responsibility. Another element of this is that the West was indirectly supporting or arming or encouraging ISIS through proxies. Whether these proxies were, somebody mentioned Turkey or Saudi. Those two cases actually are interestingly different. Saudi is certainly an ally of the West, but has its own agenda. So what is the extent to which an ally of the West, if it's got any involvement in supporting ISIS, what responsibility falls on the West for being an ally in that circumstances? Turkey is a slightly different case because Turkey arguably is actually part of the West. And obviously the whole question about Turkey's role in the European Union comes up in that particular regard. So there's an argument in there. There's an argument in there about indirect responsibility and the West carrying a burden of indirect responsibility. On the other hand, the argument was made in the same terrain about indirect responsibility, that yes, the West carried some responsibility, but it's partial and limited. And because it's partial and limited, it shouldn't be credited with the burden of responsibility in this particular instance. Part of the argument here was that interventions in countries where things are going badly wrong can be justified under certain circumstances, perhaps even if the unintended consequences that things go wrong. If intervention can be justified under certain circumstances, then maybe the West wouldn't be responsible for what might happen further down the line. So in this particular view, there is an acceptance of some responsibility, but there's lots of other things play a role. Therefore, the West shouldn't carry the burden. Interestingly, one other argument, and I'll finish with this, one other argument was made by both sides, but I think the significance of it wasn't interrogated by anyone. And that is the point that in the region there are at least 3 different wars going on simultaneously. Proxy wars, civil wars, and wars involving larger external superpowers. Both sides made that point, but neither, I think, pushed it forward to see what the implications of it are. Because if there are many wars going on, or many people involved in proxy wars, and many actors playing a role in this situation, then does any one of them carry the burden of responsibility for what has happened, or is responsibility shared? So it's how you view that terrain around the level of indirect responsibility that will determine how you vote on this particular motion.
Okay, thank you for that, Professor Gallagher, and thanks for coming along. So now we're going to go to a vote. So the first vote we're going to have is on your opinion. So what is your opinion on this motion? So there's proposition, opposition, or abstention if you're just a bit meh and don't have really undecided. So if you could pull out your nicely shiny new membership cards, if you guys have one. If you don't, please see our secretary at the end. £4 membership today only, otherwise it's £5 for students, £10 for graduates, and £15 for associates. So get it today. Yes, grand, okay. There are members that aren't able to vote today. I understand, so you can all vote for this one time only. I'm only offering £4 today, one time only. So for all of those who believe that the West did create ISIS, could you please raise your membership card or your hand and say aye? Aye.
Yeah, 25.
And for all of those who are on the side of the opposition and believe that the West did not create ISIS, please raise your hand and say nay.
Nay.
And all of those who are abstaining from the motion, please raise your hand and say
Sorry, can we do that one again?
Okay. All abstaining, say nay.
Hands up. 16?
Yeah, 16. Not that I tried you at all.
Oh, thanks.
Okay, and this vote, this is the binding vote of our society, and this is the one that will be recorded in the minutes. So it's the best speakers. So there's people who thought the proposition were best speakers, people who thought the opposition were best speakers, and those who thought they were either equally rubbish or equally good. So can we go for people who thought the proposition were better speakers? Please raise your hand and say whatever.
8.
Yeah. And those of you who thought the opposition were better speakers?
You're like Sherlock.
say 32?
So 34.
33.
34. Well, abstentions by other people in the room. Which is bad. So okay, so all of you who thought they were either equally rubbish or equally good, please raise your hands.
20.
Okay, so that's it. The opposition have it on the vote for the letterific. And if you'd like us, next week the motion is this House believes cancer treatment is overfunded. Please see your secretary for signing up. £4 a day. Remember that offer? £4, yeah. And we're all heading to the speakeasy. Oh, Birdcage?
Oh, Birdcage.
Birdcage, okay. We're all going to come up to Birdcage, have a place for out, and we're all